I'm a libertarian. What I'm getting is,
did you vote for Joe Jorgensen or Trump?
Who?
Joe Jorgensen. That was the perfect answer. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody, to the Libertarian Podcast Review. I am Tyler Yonke. Look, Clint of the Liberty Lockdown, he is becoming part of the problem in a few ways. One is he's going to be with Dave. He's going to be with Robbie the Fire again, but his computer's a problem. Clint, thank you for slumming it here with me again today. Appreciate it.
That is definitely part of my problem now. Yeah, I'm very excited to have Dave on Liberty Lockdown on Thursday and then go on Run Your Mouth with Robbie the Fire that night. So it should be awesome.
Yeah, you got your day is ahead of you. What day is that? You said Thursday?
Thursday, yeah.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Are you enjoying your daily conference calls here with me? Because we're
I know, right? I feel like we're employees of each other in some way. So
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. I just wanted to say, first of all, I really appreciate, look, I'm a nobody podcast. I really appreciate you continually coming back in. I know we had some computer problems. I did get some feedback that people really enjoyed some of that. So just a quick thing I just wanted to say here. I grew up religious, went to my church with my grandpa once when I was in college. I was late for church. He comes up to me and he says, "Hey, late to church, late to heaven." And I'm like, I literally retorted back with better late than never, right? Because, you want to get in there. But it kind of reminds me of like, you get a lot of problems with, Dave, as an example, gets shit for talking to people on the alt-right and whatnot. Doesn't matter when and how they get to the liberty movement, just as long as they do, right? And I really appreciate Dave shouted you out again. Pete shouted you out again yesterday on Liberty Weekly. And I love how you guys are willing to, if as long as it's someone promoting liberty, you're all about sharing the news, sharing those guys and bringing them on. And Dave has done that to you, which I think is amazing. And it shows his humility in a sense, right? So once again, I appreciate you taking your time coming here with me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that if any true believers in this stuff really want to see this thing grow, we have to support those that are out there that are trying to do that. And that's why, I'll pretty much go anywhere. I just really want to spread this message and also, uplift people that I think are putting out good stuff.
Right. I appreciate that. Okay. So let's talk about Kevin Castley. We just started to get into it last time. You did a podcast with him, a debate. So just remind everybody, because this is its own separate thing, how this came about and then what your mindset was of even going into the Neocon world here.
Sure. My buddy Asarchist he posted this thing about John McCain, how like the thing that had saved the most lives in the Middle East of any politician in the past 30 years was John McCain's tumor. And it was pretty spicy.
Right.
And it went kind of viral, and it somehow ended up in the nether realm with the neoconservative Twitter world. And he ended up debating them for about 2 weeks straight online. And people were just like begging for him to go and debate this Kevin Castley guy, who I had never heard of, who no one had ever heard of, thankfully. And Ace basically refused. And so people were like, well, who's going to do it? And then people started tagging me. So I obliged. And I went on there onto his show and honestly, sincerely tried to approach it with an open heart and an open mind and to understand their rationale, because I thought it would give me the best chance of hopefully dissuading a few neocons from taking that path. So that was how I went about it. That's how it came about.
Have you heard from anybody that like didn't maybe know about you but saw that and said, oh, it's a different view?
Oh yeah. No, I've gotten, my DMs are crazy right now. It's like because of Dave talking about the Neocon debate. Right. Now all these people went out to go and find it, and now they're all watching it. They're commenting on my YouTube channel, and it's like it's nonstop. But yeah, it's as far as converting any hardliners that were friends with Kevin Castley. I got one guy that I think. He at least DM'd me saying, you really presented some interesting concepts that I hadn't considered. If that keeps him from committing war crimes in the future, awesome. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're going to go through this. And I had mentioned to you right before we had some computer glitches last time,
right.
That me coming from my world, kind of conservative most of my life, and then kind of coming over to this, I have some real epiphanies I've had in the last 4 or 5 years. but I understand some of his motives or where he's coming from, and that maybe the fact that he's 27 really says something about some of his arguments. And I'm not sympathetic to him, but I want to, and I think you took a great approach of trying to be the best you could for liberty in this sense. But his age, how do you think that really played into this?
I think it makes a major difference. I mean, I think we talked about this last time I was on, but I was, after 9/11, I think many people, even, peace-loving non-interventionists, had some bloodthirst. We were like, well, 3,000 of our people got taken out. We're going to do something about it. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that emotion. I think that it is kind of a base instinct. But I think that it is incumbent upon us to reflect on, how misled we were in that moment into attacking so many people that had nothing to do with it. And in fact, doing Osama bin Laden's bidding by, dragging us into our own quagmire voluntarily. We did exactly what brought down the USSR. And I think that that's the lesson of all this, is that, even if you are attacked, it's very important that you don't buy into the propaganda, and neocons are huge fans of the propaganda. So.
Right. Okay, let's get right into this first one. And this clip I'm going to take first is actually about 16 minutes into the show, but he describes himself. So we'll start with there, then we'll kind of back up and just go chronologically through some of these. So let me know if you can't hear this.
I'm a 27-year-old recent graduate at university, did a degree in economics, political science. I am basically I describe myself as a liberal neoconservative with offensive realist characteristics. So what that means essentially is that I believe in the preservation of the Enlightenment and the expansion of the Enlightenment, the West, as we see it, the Western project throughout the world. I'm a moral universalist. I run a meme page called Liberal Hawk Memes for moral universalist teens. We got about 2,500 followers over there. And that's basically,
Solid.
I'm a moral universalist for what was it, like neoconservative teens or something? It's just so funny.
Right. Oh, let me finish this off here. So I'm going to get about another minute because there's some interesting stuff you've got.
Sure.
Oh, hang on. This is what happens when you
like information that are young, Korea or America, they'd say, well, like they miss the food, or they like having people that they can communicate with from North Korea. But if you ask them where would they rather be if you could speak the same language, and that they'd rather have the rights that Americans have, basically. And so for me, kind of a bit about my background, I started YouTube shortly after graduating, and I've been making videos basically for the most part focused on interventionism, on national security issues, on international relations at large on a theoretical standpoint, and really trying to rather kind of snap people out of this idea that, well, you can support democracy, you can support human rights, you can support virtues in the West, but think that, well, but who are we to say that that's better than what they have in North Korea or Iran or whatever? Whereas for me, part of my project here is to try to say, yeah, we are the best and we should be proud of that. So that's a little bit about me. Is there any?
Okay, so besides the fact that I don't like the way he pronounces North Korea, what's any? And then look, I'm gonna let most of this is gonna be his clips and stuff because I want them to actually go check it out. But you're gonna add different things here. But you had great comments and comebacks the whole time. What is your kind of retake on listening to this after thinking about it again on who he is in a sense?
I mean, I think he's a young guy who's bought into a line of thinking that's killed a lot of people. Like I said, I really did go in there with an open heart because I think that you can't really shame these guys. They're so accustomed to being shit on, to be, profane about it. But do you think that happens? I mean, I get the feeling that maybe they're just so inoculated in their own world that they don't necessarily, but you say that, yes, they're good. Okay. Yeah, I mean, because I saw what Ace and my crowd were doing to them for the past 2 weeks, and I think that even in my interview with him, he mentioned it, is that like we are a fringe ideology, and I mean we are too. But I think in a weird way, even though neoconservatives ran our government for the past 25 years, maybe even longer, they are now kind of persona non grata when it comes to the public's approval ratings. That doesn't mean that we don't still have neoconservatives or at least hawks all throughout our governmental ranks. But when it comes to online interactions, they're pretty despised. So I tried to go in there not taking that tact. I knew, so many of the other libertarians and ANCAPs had already taken that tact, and I thought that it would be more compelling to try and give the emotional argument against their belief system. And whether or not it worked, it's kind of irrelevant. It was like we were trying everything to get through to them.
Right. So I don't necessarily disagree with his idea that the West is the best. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, well, that was kind of the most frustrating thing to me, is that he thinks that if we oppose intervention, that we don't think that we're any better than them. And I couldn't disagree with that more. I mean, he kept calling himself a moral relativist. Well, I mean, first off, I'm not a moral he said he's a moral universalist, and he kept, even after we talked for 2 hours, he does this post stream and he starts calling me a moral relativist. And it couldn't be further from the truth. No. I am absolutely not a moral relativist. I think that our government is far superior to North Korea. I'll just say that now. I mean, if that's, that I think that they are both bad, and I think that they should both be dismantled. But that doesn't mean that I think that, we're as bad or worse than North Korea. And it's just a ridiculous argument. I think that it's a straw man. They're trying to drag us down and make us seem like we're crazy people and that we hate the American government more than we hate any other government across the planet. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Obviously, North Korea is more dangerous. China is also more dangerous than America at present, even though it's getting close. So yeah, it's just a silly argument.
I took it as, he's like, and I think I made this comment right before we blitzed out last time, which was, I want freedom, and I'm going to make you, enjoy my kind of freedom. You think back of the Gulf War or George W. Bush, and, we're going to spread democracy to the Middle East, which I was like, yeah, it sounds great. These people are going to just probably embrace when we come over there. Right. We couldn't do that. And at this point, I'm thinking we can't even spread democracy in the US right now with COVID. What is your mindset of trying to do this in the Middle East? It's not going to happen. So he's very set on he knows what's going on, and this is the way it is.
Yeah. And the truth is that, people, I mean, even if these people were ready for democracy, we're not offering them that. No. We put in puppets. We in Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, all across the Middle East, we have our puppets doing our bidding. Those elections are essentially dictatorships. So like, the argument is nonsense. And I wish I had spent more time on that. Honestly, that was probably the one thing that I blew, is that I should have spent more time. But
how would you do that?
I mean, I just would have mentioned the fact that, I forget their names. That's the other reason I probably didn't bring it up, is that I think it was Karzai in Afghanistan, and then whatever the dude's name is in Iraq. We back these people and we put them in power. So to call it spreading democracy is just not the case. I mean, if you have a foreign power, that's like in 2016, people lost their minds because they thought that Russia ran a few Facebook ads to get Donald Trump elected. I mean, that's nowhere near what we do in the Middle East to prop up people. The Shah of Iran, you have example after example of us, claiming we're spreading democracy, but in fact installing our puppets across the Middle East. So that's what I would have said.
Oh, well done. And one thing I've really done in my life in the last 4 or 5 years, that's really when things happened to me, is the understanding that, these different, not as Malice kind of says, he doesn't have the hubris of knowing what's best for your life. And that's the same in the Middle East and everywhere else. Because I was firmly under the idea, yes, we're going to, save them in a sense. Almost like a religious thing. And that's just not possible. I wouldn't want them coming doing that here. But for me, it's just a realization, kind of my own downfall and my thinking of, I think that the way our life is better than theirs, but that's still for them to decide.
It is. Yeah. And honestly, I think many people in the Middle East would say that our lives are better than theirs. But oftentimes our lives are better than theirs because we have been bombing them for decades. So it's I don't know. It's not cut and dry. And obviously having a foreign power decide that for another foreign country or a foreign population, I think is immoral in its own right. Even if like Japan ends up better after we drop 2 nukes on them. Does it make us moral? Like are we actually doing good? I would argue eviscerating and vaporizing hundreds of thousands of innocents is never good. And, sure, you could have a butterfly effect after that where it ends up being a better country and a more peaceful and prosperous one decades down the road. But I'll never be able to look at those events and say, well, Japan ended up better, so nukes are great. It's like, I don't know, man. That's dangerous.
And we'll get into the war stuff here in a little bit, but how do you then, because look, I don't know if you've read Michael Malice's book about North Korea. I have, and it's fantastic. And it really puts a different light to me. I used to, once again, 4 or 5 years ago, you'd mock them for, he's got 18 hole-in-ones and they're such a comedic type of country. And then you realize there's just a bunch of people in prison camps. And how then do you want to change that for those people over there without being this, hegemonic empire?
Right. Well, yeah. Are you asking me how I want to change it?
I'm just, mentally, how do you then get yourself in that position? Because these are the kind of things that we're always talking about, right? And that you're having a disagreement with Mr. Castley here, but yet you feel for those people. So then how do you not take his approach and yet try to work the best foreign policy wise for these countries?
I think
North Korea.
Yeah, North Korea. I think that that the same point I made about Japan is what I would make here, is that, whether or not toppling Kim Jong-il or Un, and, he literally said he wants to nuke them.
Yes.
So I don't see how North Korea becomes a better place by turning it into glass. And I do weep for the people of North Korea. I think it's absolutely tragic what's been happening to them and continues to happen to them to this day. As far as, what Americans can do, I think that we have to kind of be the shining city on the hill that's a true signal or a beacon to truly oppress people across the globe. And we're nowhere near that. I think once upon a time we may have been, but that ship has sailed. And I wish that there was something we could do to help these people, but any militaristic intervention is going to create, not just in North Korea, it'll have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of deaths in South Korea, because they're not going out without a fight at this point, as far as I can tell. So you're risking nuclear war in South Korea, and South Korea is a very good country with, really advanced technology and a really good economy and good people from what I've seen. And it would be tragic that, in our efforts to, quote unquote, free the people of North Korea, we create a nuclear war that eviscerates an even freer country. It's just not something you can do. That ultimately it's incumbent upon the people of that nation to rise up. And I realize that they may fail. They may not have the resources to do it. I don't know. It's one of those situations where it's like, yeah, obviously it's a problem. Obviously it would be great if we could help fix it. But I don't see any neoconservative options that assist them in any way.
It's kind of the medical thing of, don't do more harm, right? Let's not
exactly
remove the guy's heart when you're trying to fix his leg or something like that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to the start kind of back here, and we're going to go through the lockdowns, which you had first brought up. So we'll go with this clip.
Obviously, there's a huge amount of demand for people that are equally pissed off about the lockdowns. So that's what people know me for, and I look forward to this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. That's something that we could discuss, is a bit about the lockdown situation, because for me, I've got criticisms in terms of how the government's kind of, taken a more, I don't necessarily want to use the term authoritarian, but in the technical sense of it, a more authoritarian direction in it as the pandemic's gone on. I'm kind of the view that if you're going to do that, you need to do it at the start. But I'm not somebody who just, straight up says that the government should basically do what they've been doing in China or anything. But I do think that government restrictions on social interaction, on business operation stuff is appropriate in a pandemic such as this. But what's your view around the lockdown, and to what sort of extent do you think there should have been government, intervention in society to prevent the spread of the virus?
Okay. So I thought that was an interesting one, where he's almost like they didn't do enough to begin with. And but for him, at what point can we can the U.S. government then justify almost being like China-like restrictions?
Yeah, no, I should have hammered him on that point. And that's why I brought up immediately after that. I said, do you guys believe in the Bill of Rights? Like, because I was honestly questioning it. I was like, if the Bill of Rights is waived during an emergency situation, you don't have rights, because they can just call it an emergency situation anytime. I led down that point, and then we got sidetracked somehow. So I was headed there, but you're absolutely right. That's true. I mean, these guys don't believe in it.
You're doing a spoiler alert here for what's coming.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry.
No. So what I'm doing here is just trying to get the mindset of this kid and trying to, it's interesting to me. One of the biggest things for me, always try to be, limited government. And I read the thing about, I'm like, why is Rothbard and these other people that are starting to get into, how do they do this anarchy thing? And when Rothbard is basically having a conversation with some liberals, and they're like, well, you want limited government, but yet you're okay with them doing, this project and this thing. Why, if it's this and this, why not everything else? And he's like, yeah, you're right. So we shouldn't have any of it. And this is kind of what you see here with the right still has things they want to restrict, and he's got restrictions he wants to do. But at what point I guess it's his restrictions. So
yeah, well, and that's the danger in all this, is that, if you give the government the power to remove your rights for any purpose, they're going to do it eventually. And that's why I was so opposed to the lockdowns, because first and foremost, this virus was relatively benign. It is not the Spanish flu. It is not the bubonic plague. It is a problem. I'm not saying it doesn't exist like some people do. But the reaction was so overboard, so over the top. And every single, sinister plot that they had in terms of removing our rights it was a trial run, as far as I'm concerned. Like it seems like that to me. You can look at, if you want to go the Alex Jones route, you can look at what's it called, Plan 201 or whatever. They had, they talked about this 1 year prior to actually implementing it. It's really creepy. And then you have the World Economic Forum, which is talking about how they're going to build back better. And you have politicians all across the globe using that exact language. This is, people call it a conspiracy theory, but if you look at this stuff, it's there. It's written. They brag about it. So I don't know. I don't know what else to call it.
When this whole thing happened, I was like, oh, this is Greta Thunberg and Al Gore's wet dream, in a sense, right? Of shutting everything down. And this is what it was. Okay, let's go on to another one you have here of questioning.
By the way, they're writing articles now. They're writing articles now saying that the lockdowns were so good for carbon emissions, we're going to have to do this every 4 or 5 years. It's coming, man.
Right. Scary times. Okay, hang on here.
The morality or I think you used the term superiority of the American government. Why is it that, where do you draw the line when you start to question the American government?
Well, I think that there's always a place for constructive criticism, but I think that it varies in terms of how much of a crisis you're in or how much of a war you're in. So, for example, I think that criticism of the government in peacetime or in not as severe a war as, say, World War II is less of an issue than criticism of the government if you're in, say, a total war or something, like if it's the Third World War, World War II, or whatever. I think so. In that sense, I think that there's a difference between crisis mode versus standard peacetime in that sense. But
can I interrupt you just briefly?
Yeah.
You said during peacetime. I don't view us having peacetime in my life. So are you saying basically only when we have large scale declared wars, these skirmishes and whatnot that we've been in for my entire life, you would say that we are able to critique them during those, correct? Or no?
Critique them, absolutely. Do what Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning did? No. But
okay, I thought we'd go from there. So what's your idea? By the way, I love the pushback. Every time people watch it in its entirety, I've done it multiple times just out of watched it and because I wanted to see the visual part and then listen to it as well. But constructive criticism, he's allowing for that. What do you say there?
Well, I just think it's hilarious because constructive criticism is like, ultimately the government doesn't have to do what we say, It comes down to they do what we allow them to do, and if you're only able to criticize the government during times of peace, when you have a militaristic empire, you can't ever criticize them because we're always at war. And that's why I asked him, I was like, well, are you talking about when we're during world wars or when we, Afghanistan? Does that count? Libya toppling, Iran? Does that, when am I allowed to say that this shit is not cool? And he basically was just like, well, you can talk about it, but you just can't do anything about it. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not really the American way. I mean, you have to draw a line, and you have to mean it at some point where you say, I'm not going to allow this to happen anymore. And for the neocons, because they're so pro intervention, they don't have that line. They're upset that we're not in more countries right now. And, that's why it was just kind of a fruitless endeavor talking to him about this, but moreover, I wanted the audience to hear that perspective.
It seems like a lot of these things, and we'll keep going through here, that the starting point is, okay, the government is right. So now let me go from there. They've put out a story, Snowden, he's a bad guy. Chelsea Manning, who else did he mention? WikiLeaks guy, these are all, they're bad. And then we're going to go from there. Whereas I would hope people will be a little skeptical of the government's, statements.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, thank God for Edward Snowden and Reality Winner and Julian Assange. All these people brought up actual information. So like, we're being lied to by our government. These people were whistleblowers, which in American history has been looked on as a positive.
Right.
But for him, because it undermines the military and our intervention is, propaganda, it's no longer okay. So he doesn't actually mean that we're allowed to disagree, because if you have information that proves that the American government is propagandizing the American people into further military interventionism that's uncalled for, he doesn't want you to be allowed to say it, and he thinks you should spend time in jail for it. So he's just full of shit. I mean, to be honest.
Right. And constructive criticism is somewhat subjective too. So I mean,
no kidding.
And I think he said constructive. So, so that's okay. Next one here. When is criticism appropriate?
Conflict. So as far as like, where does criticism of the government, the U.S. government, become inappropriate? I would say under the most dire of circumstances, sometimes you do need to have trust in the government to guide things, such as the Third World War, or say if this virus had been like a plague or something, where say it had like a 30% kill rate or something, or 50% kill rate.
Given how minor it was, why are you not more vocally opposed to the lockdowns? I mean, it does seem as if, especially at this point, we can all reflect on the actual fatality rates and conclude that this is a dramatic totalitarian response. Well, you may not describe it as totalitarian. I would, but do you still think that it was justified even after knowing everything we know now?
Well, I think that we need to differentiate between different governments' approach. I think that the United States government's response to COVID in the beginning was far too little, in my view. And as time has gone on, it's become somewhat onerous, and it's too late to really do too much of a difference at this point. And so at some point when the virus is already so penetrated into your country, there's only so much that you can do. However, you can still mitigate the spread of it. And I think that one reason why we look at it and say, well, the death rate of it is, between 1% and 5%, depending on what you look at. It does miss the point that if we compare it to what it would have been without any government intervention, it definitely would have been higher. And so when we...
Okay, so he reminds me there of kind of the Obama thing of with the jobs saved, just, hey, if we hadn't have done this, it would have been much worse. And so therefore, this fear and risk is putting it out there. Yep. His point on that, what do you think? Any missed opportunities you had there?
Well, I mean, I think I didn't catch the fact that he was saying a death rate between 1% and 5%, because it realistically it's between 1% and 5% if you catch it, which most people haven't. So I missed that, but it's just because you're thinking as they're talking, so sometimes you miss stuff. But as far as his overall perspective that, had we had a more totalitarian response early on, then all of this would have been prevented. If you have an open economy, if you have an open society that has any sort of participation in a globalized world, there's no stopping this thing. It's going to be anywhere where you have open commerce. So you're essentially asking yourself to be walled off until there's a vaccine. And at this point, they're not even saying that this vaccine, which isn't really a vaccine, it's some variant. You just
yeah, you would have been locked down forever. So I don't understand this perspective. It seems to me that we would have been better off to rip the Band-Aid off, allow, basically keep our hospitals at capacity or close to, let this thing burn through us, because it's doing it anyways. We just slowed down the process and protect the actual at-risk population. That's how we've handled any other pandemic in history, basically. And this one, we decided, no, global lockdowns. I mean, it's crazy. I should have hammered it a little harder. But honestly, when we went into this conversation, all I was planning on talking to him about was interventionism. So I was totally caught off guard that he wanted to talk about the lockdowns. But I guess with my name being Liberty Lockdown, I should have been prepared. So,
but you've got to at least praise him for his non-intervention, or the way he wants to take almost COVID and intervention stuff the same, right? Just hammer people, take away their rights, and
he's consistent.
He's consistent. We got to give him that.
Consistently evil, but whatever.
Right. Okay, so here's where you did ask them about I think this is the part where you asked them about the Bill of Rights. So we'll jump to this, because you did hammer him on that, and I think that was very obviously appropriate.
From my vantage point, I think that's really what I wanted to get to the bottom of. Is like, okay, which aspect of the Bill of Rights allows a lockdown in your view, or do you guys not believe in the Bill of Rights? I really don't know.
Well, you need to obviously be flexible enough to adjust to crisis situations. It's the sort of thing, Machiavelli said that, in a time of crisis, a dictatorship that's not able to think like a democrat will be overthrown, and a democracy that's not able to think like a dictator won't survive the crisis. And so you do need to be have some degree of flexibility when you're facing a once in a century type pandemic.
Okay, I like how his two circumstances are only either you start as a dictator or you end up as a dictator, and there's nothing in between. It's those are your two options.
That's what he wants, though. I think that's the thing that people miss, is that these guys want a dictator because they believe in their moral superiority. I mean, they are so confident that they have moral righteousness and goodness in their heart that whatever they do, even if it's bombing, nuking prison populations, they're still in the right. So why wouldn't you want a dictator if you're that certain of your goodness? And I think I'm just simply not. I'm not that certain of my moral goodness that every decision I would make for every population across the entire planet would be the right one for them. And right. I think that's the point I was trying to drive home to him over and over again. But he just consistently accused me of being a moral relativist, because I'm saying I don't know what they want, Right. And ultimately I can't know what they want, nor can I implement it without killing tons of innocent people. So,
and that's so good. And, you wrap your head around some of these things of, there is good and there is evil. And I'm firm in those beliefs. Yeah. I just don't know that necessarily I'm going to be judging everything. Well, and look, even anarchy, right? As we believe it, there doesn't mean that there aren't laws. It doesn't mean that there's not hierarchy. Right. Mm-hmm. You can still do good and bad. We'd still judge people. And I think that's very appropriate to do.
But especially if there's a victim.
Exactly. Especially if there's a victim. Okay. This is his answer to the Bill of Rights here. Coming up.
So to kind of answer your question about the Bill of Rights and everything, it's yes, in theory, all this stuff is good. However, if you're so inflexible that you can't essentially take extraordinary means in times of extraordinary crisis, then you're not going to survive it. Now, I don't think the pandemic is necessarily as bad as it's been touted by some people. I've said it before, I could have been a lot worse. I did a stream about a year.
That's all I really wanted to play in there. So
I love that he brings up Machiavelli, by the way.
Right. I'm not too schooled on Machiavelli, but his whole idea there of he's very inflexible about your rights. Almost a positive rights type of theory, I think.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, he doesn't believe in the Bill of Rights. Let's just be honest. And I tried to get him to essentially say it. But like I've said already, if you don't believe that we have rights even in the times of a crisis, then we don't have rights. And it's really that simple. So there was no getting that point across to him, because he thinks he's good.
You did mention, and he's Canadian. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Maybe it's just a little even ingrained in us how rights and, where do those rights come from? I mean, I don't know if you asked them that. You asked them about a Bill of Rights, but it's always interesting to ask people where they came from, because if they're coming from the government, that means the government can take them away. So
exactly. Yeah, no, he's a believer in that. I mean, he clearly, the way he said it is that if during a time of crisis you can remove our rights, he's a positive rights guy. Like,
right.
It has to. There's no other answer to that.
And then your great point about declared wars, or the war on drugs, the war on COVID. I mean, if it's only during crisis time, then we're in a problem. Okay.
Yeah. Global warming. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. His issue, and I kind of tag this one as bullying.
Countries that are not necessarily, it's not North Korea, it's not Syria. I don't know, some country that's in between, that you obviously isn't American, but also is not pure evil. Are you still calling for them to essentially, I don't know, overthrow their government, cede their power to the American Union of some sort? Like, what is the game plan, the end plan?
Yeah. So I think it's important to distinguish between the people and the regime. So obviously, say Syria, the Syrian people want human rights, they want freedom, they want their own, their own ability to be free in their own homes and stuff like that. Assad doesn't want to be a part of the world order. Assad has to go, basically. So to answer your question, there are two different means. So with great superpowers, great powers like China and Russia, war is not the solution. I talk about how it would actually be very easy to deal with China. All that you would do is, as a world community, or even just as the US, say, we're not trading with you anymore, you're done. We're going to take a really big financial hit, but you guys are cut off from trade, and the people would lose their jobs over there, and they would overthrow the communists within a year. And so they'd be done. You wouldn't have to do a nuclear war with them.
Isn't that exactly what we did with Japan, though, man? I mean, isn't that what brought about Pearl Harbor, is that we embargoed them?
Oh, well, it's very possible. I want to be clear here. It is possible that they don't respond to it, favorably, and they open fire on blockading vessels. The U.S. would win a war, though. Like, they know that, so they wouldn't make that move if they.
Okay, and by the way, I'm running this a little bit faster speed just to make sure we get through these clips so you can have time to talk about it. I feel like that he's Canadian, and well, he is Canadian, but my feeling is that.
I like how it sounded like a pejorative. I feel there like he's Canadian.
Well, he's very Canadian. Well, in a sense, as far as foreign policy goes, I mean, look, they're well protected. They have the United States, and that's kind of his idea. I always want them to go out, and I want you to be the bully for me, and then I'll just sit back up here in the north.
Yep, that's what he believes. And I mean, I love this perspective. We could deal with China really easily, and people don't understand that. You're fucking crazy, dude. There are 1.4 billion people that have nuclear weapons, and they are programmed to believe in their government to a large extent. They have an enormous military. They're now building a navy. I mean, it's laughable to think that we could deal with them easily. If we could, we would have, because we are very imperialistic, and we absolutely would have if we could have. So it's just nonsense. I mean, it's such a Pollyanna-ish, utopic, psychotic perspective that you could just have the entire world decide to stop trading with China, and within a year the Chinese people would overthrow their government. I'm like, okay, or they would nuke us, or they would start a war with an adjacent country. They would start to bomb Australia. They would do something. For sure they would do something. No power of that magnitude goes down without a fight. And it's just, obviously, I push him back for 2 seconds, and he immediately acknowledges, yeah, well, it's possible that they might fight back. And it's like, yeah, of course they're going to fight back. And he's like, but we would win a nuclear war with China. I was like, I don't want a fucking nuclear war with China. What are you talking about? So yeah, it's crazy.
We had trouble in Vietnam. We've had trouble in Afghanistan, and in the Middle East. But China's
easy.
Right.
Just stop trading with them. It's a done deal.
Right. There's a little bit more than that. Okay. Now we're going to go into the drugs situation. I just did a few little things here, and it all just, look, I think it melds all of it, and you get a background of who he is and your arguments. You said at one point that this may be too personal of an issue. Is that something you had known about? Did his dad succumb to drug abuse or something?
I don't know if he succumbed to it, but in the prior debate with Keith Knight, he mentioned that his dad had a drug addiction, so he wasn't in his life to some extent. So I don't know if he was in prison. I don't know if he was just, I have no idea. But I felt like, and I didn't want to bring it up because it is a low blow, but at the same time, I did want to understand his perspective. So I was trying to walk the fine line of like, will you talk about this without me seeming like I'm just trying to dunk on you because your dad was a drug addict? Because I really wasn't attempting to do that, because that would have been just mean for no reason. And
actually, to me, it's the more sympathetic point of, the more humanistic perspective is really what you take, and his is once again a little bit more on the harsh side. Let's listen to it.
I consider selling drugs to be a violent crime. I don't consider buying drugs to be violent, but it is still criminal under the laws as they are right now. But no matter what we reform it to, I still think that selling this stuff should be illegal. And I think that you asked about the morality of it. I think that that's one of the ways that the government can come in and correct for the negative externalities of people not necessarily knowing what's best for them. And I want to live in a system where the government is looking out for, the people that it's responsible for. I think that that is one area where having a government is preferable to not having a government, is that sort of, you could call it compassionate conservatism, whatnot, paternalism, that sort of thing. I think that there's a role there. As long as the government's not corrupt, not malicious or anything, there's a role there that the government can actually improve society by making calls that are in everybody's best interest. Because once you become addicted to drugs, you lose your liberty to make rational choices thereafter, right? Like, you might have the freedom to make that choice to become addicted to it, but once you're addicted to drugs, you're no longer exercising liberty in a rational sense.
I have to.
Okay, so I hope you're not getting triggered on by listening to all these.
I am.
wait till you get to the war stuff. Yeah. So paternalistic. That's the idea, though, that the government is always going to make those right decisions for you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's his belief, though. I mean, he really believes that. And are we going to play more clips from that segment? Because if not, I'll say what I said.
I did a little bit here about the immoral laws and black market and the medicinal stuff, but say it if it's just don't have to say it on the next time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, God, now I forgot. What was it? Anyways, let's keep it going. I think that his argument about having the government implement their morality and it being good for sure is nonsense. Oh, that's what it was. He says that once you're a drug addict, you lose your liberty. And it's like, okay, well, you have a very obvious example where you regain your liberty, and that's in kicking drug addiction. And it happens all day, every day. People get off drugs and they stay clean for the rest of their lives. So obviously your liberty isn't lost by that. But you know what really takes your liberty? Being put in prison for the rest of your life. Yeah. That really takes your liberty away. So I think that I thought it was a total bullshit argument that once you're drug addicted, you don't have liberty. I mean, sure, you have an addiction, you have a problem. I would completely agree with that. But your free will is not removed. I mean, if you're born with some sort of chemical imbalance that gives you a predilection for addiction, I can understand the perspective that, okay, we have to protect these people from themselves. But ultimately, even with harsh prohibition, we don't protect them from themselves. So it's just, either way, it's nonsense.
How do you think you can reach out to like someone like himself, or those people in his sphere, with this concept of, and I think actually this is what I think is great about like the Mises Institute, in a sense, where you watch a lot of these guys are your straight white, Tom Woods, tie wearing, Ron Paul, right, types that they're not doing any drugs. Mm-mm. Yet they're advocating for your freedoms more than the hippie smoking, dope smoking, whatever that you might see. So how do you reach out to these people in a sense and say, hey, your freedoms are more important than this?
I'm sorry, which people?
Like his audience. What's your best way of thinking of trying to get to, because it's going to be a continual thing, with these people when you're having conversations, but how do you feel like what is a good way? I'm looking for it.
I mean, it's tough to come up with a good argument for neoconservatives to hear our worldview. That's just the truth. But from my perspective, you're either a free person, you have free will, or you don't. And my belief is that even if you want to become a drug addict, if you set out to do it, that's still your choice. I mean, you're only hurting yourself. And I think that if you allow the government to criminalize behavior that hurts no one but yourself, you're on the fast track to a totalitarian nightmare. And that's kind of the argument that I would make to them, is that maybe for them, probably a good argument would be to talk about countries they don't like having really harsh drug laws. If China, I don't know the criminal justice system very well. Obviously, China imprisons people for a hell of a lot of reasons. Yeah. But there's plenty of dictatorial. I know North Korea has very harsh drug laws. There's plenty of dictatorial countries that they hate that have really harsh drug laws, and I should probably
have researched that and brought that up. That would probably be the best argument to say, like, well, how are we better than them if we treat our people the same way these dictators do? I think that would be a good argument. I just thought of that on the fly, so that was not bad.
I know it's of course it's good stuff. Okay, let's go to the little comments here he had about the black market and medicinal products.
Oh man, this is a good one.
Yeah,
we need to lift up those that are drug addicted and riddled with addiction, as opposed to imprisoning them. But that's utopic if you want to call it that. Maybe one day.
Yeah, I would say again that there's definitely a difference between, say, selling drugs on the black market versus prescribing things from a medicinal standpoint. I do think that is a bit of a false equivalency there. I think that there is still a difference, and I think that just because you can't address every problem in society doesn't mean you can't do some good and that you can't get rid of some problems. And so I think alcohol.
You and I both know how many people die from cigarettes and alcohol, though, right? I mean.
Yeah, no, I'm well aware of that. I think cigarettes, especially, that there's a better case to be made there for more strict government intervention on that. But I would say, especially in terms of the effect that it has on other people as well, I think that you can make a very similar argument. But
boy, he comes out, he's got all the answers. Government solving your problems. Take it away, Clint.
Well, he's just wrong. I don't even know if I have any more to add to that one. He's just deluded. Sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. So let's go on, because actually it leads into some of these next ones here, which is about the laws being moral and immoral. And I think that's really the crux to where things come down.
Are nonviolent. You're also including drug dealers in that. And I don't regard drug dealers as nonviolent. And I really do think that, if the laws are what they are, you can change them through the legal process, but the laws are still on the books. In other words, just because I disagree with what a law is doesn't mean that gives me carte blanche to go and break it. It's kind of the same thing with Edward Snowden. You can make the argument that Edward Snowden really felt that he was, doing the right thing or whatever, but it's not his place, and he still violated and infringed upon national security, especially in the case of Chelsea Manning. Right? It's like, even if they genuinely believe they were doing the right thing, that's not their prerogative. They need to follow the law still. So
there was a time in which it was illegal to, free slaves. So were those people wrong to do so?
Well, I would say that that's a bit of a false equivalence, because I regard slavery as an ill on society, the same way that I do with meth and whatnot. So it is a bit different in that case. So,
brother, I'm not saying it's the same thing, but it's pretty similar. I mean, you have people that are imprisoned. They work for pennies right now for being nonviolent drug offenders. And you have people that basically worked for room and board and were whipped if they didn't work fast enough. And it was illegal to help them get free. I think that if you're going to talk about morality and you're going to talk about following the law, it's really important that you consider all of the historical examples of absolute atrocities that were law. And I don't want to go back to Nazi Germany, but the prison guards were doing their job, man. They were following the law. Like, this is a really fucked up way of looking at the world, to think that it's okay to look the other way when people are being enslaved simply because it was the law at the time.
Well, no, I'm not making that argument. I regard the laws of Nazi Germany as illegitimate. I don't recognize their sovereignty or anything. I do recognize the sovereignty of the American government. I do consider the laws of the American government to be legitimate. So
in the 1800s, were they legitimate?
Slavery was not legitimate, no, and the Confederacy was illegitimate. But
all right, so Clint, the question is, what makes a state legitimate?
I don't know. From his perspective, I guess it just means any nation that operates in his line of morality. But he says that the American government is legitimate, but then he says that the slavery laws in the 1800s were illegitimate. And I'm like, well, that was the American government, was it not? It's just, there's a lack of consistency with these guys that I was trying to point out continually. And I think I did in that moment pretty well, in that, obviously not all laws are just. And that's all I was trying to get him to admit with bringing up slavery. And I brought it up with the American government, and that's the only thing he could come back to was like, oh, well, no, the American government is just. And it's like, well, it wasn't. You just said it. It wasn't a couple hundred years ago or 150 years ago even. So I don't know. It's, from my perspective, it's like, if you're a nonviolent drug offender who's in prison today, do you really feel that different from a slave? I mean, you didn't hurt it. You didn't hurt anybody, and your life has been ruined. And in some regards, you're treated even worse than a slave. I mean, you're not even allowed to go outside some of these people. So I don't know. He circles back to this false equivalency bullshit over and over again, which is nonsense because it's just an analogy. It's like, I'm just trying to get you to look at this from a different angle to see my perspective. It's not, I'm not, and in truth, I don't even think they are equivalent. Obviously, they're very different things, but they're both morally abhorrent. And that's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, I don't know that's what comparisons are, though. You're not always having to compare the exact same thing, and so you have to get. And it's a great mind game to see that. Just the fact that a law is passed does not make that action then, or get prohibition moral or immoral. I had this debate this summer with a guy, talking about the mask, and Fauci says one thing one day, and then another, and he's like, I follow, I said, so day one it's okay, and then the day two he changes his mind and says now you got to wear masks, and before he said not to. And you don't think that, just because someone says it, is there ever a law that's immoral? And of course there are. And I think people need to obviously think about that. But Kevin's young. We're still working on him and his buddies.
I like that you're keeping an open mind.
Well, only for the fact that I was at 27, I was not this sure of myself. I'm still not at my age, which is 49. But so I have some sympathy in a sense of trying to work through some of these, sometimes these kids, it's the first time they've thought about it. They think it's the first time anyone's ever thought about it. And so they're just like, amazed at their own thoughts. And no, it's not new. Yeah. So I'm giving them a little bit of that in the hopes that some of these people, come over to this side.
No, I think that's fair. I wasn't trying to dissuade you from keeping an open mind to him. It's just like, it's tough for me because I talked to him for 2 hours, and then
right.
I watched his post stream with all of his sycophants right after.
What was that like?
Oh,
because I did not see that. I saw you post about it.
It was excruciating. They were just like, he just kept making all these false equivalencies and blah blah blah. And he's a moral relativist. It's like, I didn't do any of that. I didn't try to make us the equivalent to North Korea. I wasn't trying to say that we're morally as bad as North Korea or China. It was just straw man after straw man like that. That's literally all they had, was to basically misstate my worldview and then to argue against it. And it was very frustrating because in that setting, I didn't have anything that I could say in response. I just had to sit there and watch them. Right.
Right. Okay, let's go to some of the war and the proxy wars that we dealt with in Vietnam.
It's Iran, man, come on! It's being embargoed by Saudi Arabia with America's support. You can't put it all. You can't have like good team, bad team. This is a proxy war, and there are innocent children dying because of your support. I'm sorry, but that's not okay.
Innocent kids died in Vietnam too. Does that mean that America shouldn't have helped South Vietnam repel the Soviet invasion? I mean,
yes. No, I wouldn't have.
So you would have let the world fall to communism now?
Because of Vietnam, the entire world would have fallen to communism.
Well, if you took that stance everywhere, you wouldn't have helped the Contras in Nicaragua. You wouldn't have helped Pinochet in Chile. You wouldn't have helped. So you would have let the world fall to communism. Okay.
Well, is it the world? I mean, you still have the United States. You still have every other nation that believes in Western free ideology that would have defended themselves. Do you honestly believe that Vietnam and Nicaragua leads to everywhere being communist?
Well, after Nicaragua, then they go to Guatemala and so on and so forth. It's a domino effect, right? That's what Truman warned about in the early days of the Cold War.
But people are responsible for defending their own freedoms. I think it's extraordinarily paternalistic and completely psychotically utopic to believe that America can prevent all evils across the globe. You're going to bankrupt this country if you continue on this path. I assure you of that. There is no amount of fiscal sanity that you can apply to our budget at home and removing Social Security if you're going to try and police the entire world forever and mold it into your image.
Okay, so if we had not entered Vietnam, how would it have been different at the outcome? That's kind of my thought that I've gone through over these years is you look at how Vietnam was before we went in and you look at how it was after we, escaped, pretty much the same thing. So why go through that process?
That was the weirdest argument that I thought he had, was that he's like, oh, so you wouldn't have helped the people of Vietnam? It's like, we lost that war. I don't understand that perspective at all. I forget what the communist creep, which politician really pushed that. I read about it when I was a kid, but I think that it was a myth. It was kind of the origin story of neoconservatism was that if we don't stop communism, it's going to take over the planet. And as much as I despise communism, I want to be very crystal clear on that. I absolutely hate communism. I do not believe that if we didn't intervene in Nicaragua and Venezuela and Vietnam, that we would all be communists today. I mean, it's just a bizarre perspective, honestly, and it really it's it's a depressing perspective, if I'm being honest, that they think that if America wasn't out there intervening every time there was some sort of communist skirmish, that communism would actually be a global plague. It's crazy.
What's been your stance on war and peace for most of your life? Has it changed more lately, or has it always been like this?
No, like I said, after 9/11, I was bloodthirsty. I was very upset because I was a 19-year-old kid who watched those planes fly into the tower on my news, and I didn't understand what had happened. I was kind of a Ron Paul acolyte even at that time. I was a very, very early on libertarian. But as you know, libertarians are not opposed to defending themselves. Right. So I was looking at it like, hey, we have to defend ourselves from whoever did this to us. Unfortunately, the story we were told that Iraq had something to do with it, and that Afghanistan, had to be conquered essentially to deal with. At the time, I think it was only 400 or 500 actual operatives that were working with Al Qaeda. It was just it ended any sort of belief in using the U.S. military to get payback. I was just like, okay, well, I learned my lesson. Never again will I buy into whatever story they tell us in my moment of grief and anger that this is what we now have to do. So that's kind of been the arc.
What about Vietnam growing up? Did you have any perceptions of that? I mean, the media and the left always projects one thing, and then me as someone on the right, I remember looking specifically for some books that were like pro-Vietnam, the reasons we were in there. I remember seeing the Green Beret movie with John Wayne, and he's like, holds up this Kalashnikov or one of this Russian, and he's like, this is what, the Russians are in here. They're fully supporting this war on the other side. And that was like in 1968 and stuff. So my thought process then was much different than I saw the document. Well, actually the whole libertarian side, I finally realized what it is for me in the war is you can be anti-war and not pro-communist, which is exactly how I felt the left projected themselves during the Vietnam War and everything after. It was, Jane Fonda sitting on the tank up there and whatnot. And anyway,
that's the mistake right there, is that, because I don't want to go intervene everywhere across the planet that communism exists, doesn't mean that I want to be communist. Quite the contrary. But, obviously Vietnam happened long before my time. So all I could do was read about it. And, my first kind of deep dive into it is what we had done in Cambodian bombing raids during that war, and how criminal it was in nature. So I was very opposed to it. I think that, there's very few military interventions that I think are justified. And upon historical analysis, I've come to the conclusion that essentially none of them are. They're almost always a product of propaganda, and they always benefit, big business and the military industrial complex. So I'm to the point where it'd be tough for you to, even if we were attacked again, it would be tough for me to be convinced that we should reciprocate in kind to some other foreign country that's allegedly the propagator of it. Unless I saw, Chinese planes coming in with Chinese flags, I'd be like, all right, now I know, but this is the problem. I mean, they propagandize us for so many generations, and they lie to us for so many generations, that it's like, now I can't trust anything. And that's just, if you're being honest about what we've experienced and what we've witnessed, I don't know how you can trust the government and what they tell us after we're, hurt and looking for payback.
What do you think about his comment where he says, you said, why don't you join the military? And he says, well, I'm either there's only two options, because I live in a binary world. I'm either, you're going to consider me a war criminal or a coward. One, if I don't, I'm a coward. And if I do, I'm a war criminal. What's your stance on being, anti-war, but the military guys?
Well, I'm a huge fan of many of the military vets, because they are the ones that come back with on the ground experience of the atrocities that they experienced or they participated in. So I honestly, and I think this is kind of your perspective on Kevin in a sense, because they're so young. How can I possibly look at an 18-year-old man who's just pumped with testosterone and going out there to, have adventure, become a man, find himself in the world, and then hate on him because we have, politicians and generals that lead us into these quagmires, it's like I don't have much animus for these kids, to be perfectly honest. And in fact, I have a tremendous amount of respect for those that go over there, see what it is firsthand, and then come back and spend the rest of their lives advocating against it. So this is not, when I talk about my hatred for interventionism and my hatred for these wars, I always try and distinguish it from my belief in the goodness of many of the soldiers. So that's kind of my outlook on it.
Yeah, and I differentiate that because kind of the same with police officers. They're a little older. They can make the decisions. Plus, they can quit their job. You can't quit your job when you're in the military. You get hung up. So
go to prison.
No chance of there. We'll just do a few. One other thing was you had mentioned how the military themselves, and I won't play the clip, is very much anti-war. And he shot back and said, no, they're the most hawkish. And then I found this clip of play it real quick here.
Should
it's
we
Scott
have
Horton.
ever fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? The American people say no by about like 60%, 62. The veterans of the Iraq and Afghan wars, they say no at like 65, 67%, ahead of the curve of the rest of the American people. So talk about thank you for your service. I respect you for your sacrifice. Well, they want to end the war. So how about that?
There you go. That's Scott Horton. He was on the Kibbe on Liberty, Matt Kibbe show, and he thought that. So you said, hey, I could send you the results. Did you end up sending him the results, or did you just say fuck it?
Yeah, I said fuck it. I knew whatever I sent him, he'd say, oh, this source is bullshit anyways. So
right.
I was like, once we were done, I really wanted nothing more to do with Kevin. But I hope yeah, no, it's fine. I don't mind talking about it. I just didn't want to talk to him. So yeah, but it is true. I mean, I've read it in multiple places, and Scott Horton was probably my source on it, if I'm being honest. So, it's fine.
Okay, we'll play one more here about Waco, and that just happened as far as the anniversary. So,
you described the kids at Waco as collateral damage. I'd like to go back to that briefly. Yeah. First off, it was over 30 children that were burnt to death. They were Americans. They were innocent. They were kids. How is it that you can support a state that would do that to somebody?
Well, the cult started the fire, right? Like the cult that was there started the fire. That America,
it's not true, but okay, continue.
Okay, well, America can't tolerate these kinds of cults that have their kids and whatnot, and oftentimes women as hostages. That's unacceptable.
People left right beforehand. So how can you say that they were hostages?
They were indoctrinated and brainwashed, and oftentimes in the case of the kids, not allowed to leave. And the cult had a death wish, and they acted upon that. I don't see how we can tolerate death cults. Is that something you should have the liberty to do? I don't believe so.
How did they have a death cult? I mean, how do you describe it as a death cult when they were sieged for fucking like 45 days and then lit on fire? How is it that they had the death cult and the military that you support isn't the death cult?
Well, because the American military is legitimate, and in that case was enforcing laws and order. And they were not it's like at a fundamental level to draw an equivalency between a death cult and the United States government is honestly insane. So,
yeah, I don't think that's insane at all. Matter of fact, I thought it was a really good comparison. Once again, he's dictating what's legitimate or not as far as that.
And he's the one bringing up the term death cult. I wouldn't have described the DEA agents or ATF agents that were participating in that as a death cult per se, had he not brought it up. But if you're going to, claim that the Waco people were a death cult when they were not suicidal, they didn't have any plans to kill themselves. That's just totally not true. So I was like, okay, but if you're going to call them a death cult, to me, it seems a lot more likely that you could describe, or more reasonable to describe, the people that sieged them for 45 days and then lit them on fire as the death cult. Like or the murder cult, if you want to say that. That one was just heartbreaking to me because, obviously I knew he wouldn't buy the perspective that the ATF had lit them on fire, even though there's video that pretty definitively shows it. So I tried not to get too deep in the weeds because I know he's just going to say, fake news, but it's true. I hope people do some research on their own and they figure it out for themselves. I think what they did to those people was an absolute atrocity. I think that is actually, if I really go back in time and I reflect on what radicalized me most, was the events at Waco. When I saw the Rules of Engagement documentary and I realized what had likely transpired. I won't say it's definitive, but it looks very likely that they sieged these people who had been basically on BS, gun charges. They had the opportunity to take out Koresh prior to the siege.
they chose not to because this is the really crazy part. They wanted to make up for their bad actions at Ruby Ridge. Right. And this is how they did it by incinerating children. It's crazy to me.
Did you see the Netflix series? And look, I've seen the two documentaries that they had about Waco. A New Revelation, I think, was the second one. You'd mentioned the other one. Both very good and well done. By the way, the most disturbing of those is probably the Senate I think it was Senate testimony. You see Chuck Schumer just as disgusting as he has always been, but pushing the narrative about the bad Waco people. But anyway, the Netflix documentary, did you see series? Did you end up seeing that before it took off?
Yeah, I did watch that one.
My wife, she should have known about this stuff, but she had a much more exciting childhood than I did. So, this just didn't pass her brain. So she finds this and she's watching this, and I'm not going to tell her the results of what happens. And she's shocked. Now, she's a little disturbed by some of the stuff that's happening in there with the families, but it's an amazing that it took someone like her, and she's just radicalized in a sense as well of how despicable the DEA and the ATF and all those departments were.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the worst thing that happened on American soil in my lifetime, unless you want to go down the conspiracy route about the Oklahoma City bombing, which who knows. But I think I know. But anyways, yeah, with Waco, it's because it's kids. That's where you really get to the point of like, okay, you can't say these children were evil. Like, you can say Koresh was taking underage brides and say that should have been stopped in some fashion. If you want to go that route, I can never use any sort of, unless you're killing these kids, I don't see any reason to siege them and then light them on fire. It's it's just the outcome couldn't have been worse. And yet you still have Americans, or in this case, a Canadian who wishes he was an American, justifying and believing that it was a righteous act. And it's just that was infuriating.
It goes back to what he said earlier, the way he just takes kind of the facts as they are, the media progressive, puts them out there, and then he works from that starting point.
Right.
Like, I don't know where you were in 93. I remember watching this with my dad and not cheering on, but I was taking hook, line, and sinker what the media was pushing. And it's only later that I have a girl that was a grade behind me that actually died in that fire.
Wow.
So yeah. So there's kind of that connection that I've had, and then I've gone into it more, and it's just been, it changes how your perspective, and you grow up a little bit and you realize that, moms wanted this off TV because their soap operas are being, disturbed all day. So for me, I look back on that and I have to admit, I'm kind of disturbed at my own mentality and my own thoughts at the time, but you move from there and you progress. So I'm giving Kevin a chance to do that as well.
Yeah, hopefully you move from there and you progress. I think some people simply don't. And it's funny because I think a lot of people struggle to deal with reflection on their own morality when they find out that they were supporting something that was truly evil. And I think that it's incumbent upon us, if you want to stop evil, to be willing to accept the fact that sometimes you're going to support it because you're being lied to. And, that's not to justify it. It's not to say that you don't, owe some moral culpability. I certainly do. I certainly do, for like having even the instinct to want to go and, bomb the Middle East because of what happened on 9/11. I feel bad about it. It's not like I voted for George Bush or any of these psychos that actually made that happen. But in my heart at that moment, I had rage, and I was willing to take the government's word for it on these are the people that did it, and we're going to go after them. And the same thing with Waco. It's like, if you're lied to, you shouldn't like hate yourself for the rest of your life because you were lied to and you supported something that was ultimately evil. As long as you realize that it was evil in hindsight, and then you say, okay, the next time I see some questionable propaganda about some cult that's in some compound and the government's sieging them, I'm gonna reserve judgment. Like, that's all I ask of people.
Real quick, and then we'll be done here. Did you ever see? Sorry, I'm Netflixing it up here. Wild Wild Country. Did you ever see that documentary? Okay, yeah. So I grew up in I don't know if you've heard of Walla Walla, Washington. It's right up there in the Northwest. This is only an hour and a half or so from where I grew up. I remember this happening, and so then I watched the documentary, and once again, I'm like, it's not as at the time, it was once again, it was this sex cult. That's what you're hearing as a kid, and it's this evil thing. And of course you need to drive them out. And now you look back on it and you're just like, it's so easy to rile up just normal Americans about strange people in their land. And there's some weird stuff that went on there too, but take a different perspective and maybe just think about things before you react. But then, we have COVID. So that's,
yeah. Well, I think that's why the non-interventionist stance is the correct one, is because you can't trust the government. You just flat out can't. You can't believe what they're saying when it comes to the propaganda about it being a sex cult or whatever they say. It's always overstated. And ultimately, if it's a sex cult, I don't care. As long as they're consenting adults, I could care less. And regardless of what the government's saying, I don't trust the government. So why would I support interventionism in any regard on any of these people if it turns out that they are on the offensive and they're attacking, peaceful neighbors and things like that? Sure, they're committing a crime and they should be dealt with. But as long as they're just sexing it up in their own little cult, I could really care less.
Right, better for them. Imperialism. He had mentioned something about imperialism. I was just thinking back, and he was arguing with you about what imperialism was. I don't know that what's your take, or do you remember that at all? And then we'll head out here. I really appreciate all your time, by the way. But he was arguing that it wasn't imperialism what we were doing around the world because we weren't colonizing, I guess.
Yeah, that I made a mistake there too. I should have hammered him on the fact that we prop up puppets. I mean, because it's not a classical colony in the sense that like we just say we now rule you and we put our people in power, but we now do it a smarter way in that we say, now you have democracy and you get to pick your ruler, and then your ruler just happens to be the guy that we like. I mean, that's really what we do. That's really the only distinguishing difference. And then secondarily, we don't take their resources back to the governmental coffers. We offer it out to big businesses' coffers. And I don't think of that as like a real improvement. I mean, you're still ripping off the people of Iraq. Like, it's not like they're getting a fair cut of their resources. So I think it's kind of a bullshit argument. Upon thinking about it further, I was like, man, I really should have gone harder on him on that. But there's just everything he said to me, I hated. So it's like, I have to pick my fights and decide what I'm going to say.
Your levels went up as the interview went on, as far as like your disdain and you're a little emotional on that. Really, it was awesome though. I hope it didn't trigger you too much.
No.
And okay. Any last things you want to say about your debate with him? And are you going to do any other debates with Neocons in the future here?
I sincerely doubt I'll be debating any Neocons. Honestly, I've never debated anybody before, so that was fun. I think that I proved that I'm a pretty capable opponent, even though I'm not a skilled debater in any real sense. Like, I haven't ever done it before, so it was just kind of like a fun experiment to kind of test my chops, to see what I'm made of. To talk to someone that I really have a tremendous amount of disdain for. See if I stunned myself upon listening back how calm I sound. If you watch it, yes. I seem far more emotional than I sounded, which is fascinating. Kind of like the JFK, JFK Nixon debate. How people, if they listened to it, they thought one guy won. If they watched it, they thought the other guy won. So I thought that was really interesting. I had never experienced that with myself, obviously. So. But yeah, I don't think I'll be debating anymore unless I might be debating, more similarly aligned ideological opponents, like a minarchist versus ANCAP and that type of stuff. That'd be interesting to me. But as far as neocons go, I'm going to bury them alongside John McCain.
That's great. Nothing's better though of working out your own philosophy and trying to figure those things out than actually debating someone, because it really pushes you and it makes you figure out the holes in your arguments, or, question it yourself, at least if you're a normal person, not a psychopath. So
like Kevin Castley. Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Hey, appreciate you coming on. Liberty Lockdown. Everyone check him out online. Check your podcast out, especially this week.
Big time. We got Comic Dave Smith on Thursday at noon, which it'll be released that night. And then that evening I will be on Run Your Mouth with Robbie the Fire, who's the co-host of Part of the Problem, which is Dave Smith's show. And Dave shouted me out with Pete Quinones, and it's crazy, man. I can't even believe that he took the time to watch that debate, much less thought highly enough of it to call me great. I was like, this is incredible. So
that just means you're alt-right adjacent, since he used the word great. All right. I really appreciate all your time and efforts with me. Good luck, and best of luck with that computer, especially.
Thanks, Tyler.
All right. Take care. Bye.